Chief Justice John Roberts walked into the hearing, believing he'd seen it all, until Jasmine Crockett used his own words against him and left the room silent. The stillness inside room 2141 of the Rayburn House Office building wasn't calming. It felt like the tense pause before a sharp blade cuts through the air. On the schedule, it looked like just another hearing. But everyone present sensed something different was about to unfold. Robert sat at the witness table in a sharp navying suit worth more than most people's monthly paychecks. He appeared calm, confident, maybe too confident. This wasn't his first time before Congress. He'd testified before and knew the strategy. Say just enough, control the pace, stay untouchable. But today's subject wasn't abstract constitutional theory. It was something far more uncomfortable: judicial ethics. Questions had been piling up: impartiality, undisclosed gifts, hidden ties. Cameras captured every moment, and this time there was no protective robe to hide behind. Lawmakers took their turns, some gentle, others cautious, careful not to push too hard. Then her name was called. Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas leaned into the mic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone alone commanded the room. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." At first, not everyone in the room paid close attention. They knew who she was, a former public defender, still new to Congress, sharp in debates and unafraid to speak her mind. But this was different. She now faced the most powerful judge in the nation, and you could almost feel people silently betting how long she could keep up. Roberts didn't flinch. He offered the kind of polished smile men in power often perfect. Half patience, half performance, as though he were humoring a bright student. But Crockett wasn't there for approval. She was there for accountability. "Chief Justice," she began, "you've said before that the court follows a strict standard of ethics, even without a formal code. Is that correct?" Roberts folded his hands, speaking evenly. "That is correct, Congresswoman. The members of the court follow principles that have long guided judicial conduct." She gave a quick nod and turned a page in her folder. "Then help me understand. If that's true, why was there no disclosure of the relationship between Justice Merritt and a political donor whose case came before the court last year?" The air shifted. Cameras clicked. A few heads turned. Roberts's smile faded. He adjusted his tie. "I'm not at liberty to comment on ongoing ethics reviews or matters involving individual justices." "Right," Crockett replied, glancing down briefly before locking eyes again. "But you can speak on precedent, correct?" "Yes." "Good," she said, her tone sharp but steady. "Because my understanding is that the Supreme Court has long used the appearance of impropriety as its standard, hasn't it?" "It's not just about whether something breaks the rules," Crockett said. "It's about whether the public has reason to believe it might." Roberts shifted slightly. "The appearance standard has guided many institutions, yes," she pressed on without pause. "Then wouldn't failing to disclose a close relationship with someone who directly benefits from a court decision look improper?" Her voice stayed steady. No shouting, no raised tone. She didn't need to. The silence in the room was already doing the work. Roberts remained composed, but his words carried more caution now. "Congresswoman, I believe we're moving into hypotheticals." "I'm not," she shot back. "I'm quoting facts from your court's own financial records." The tension rose, though the breaking point hadn't arrived yet. Roberts straightened in his chair, one hand resting on the mahogany table, his eyes calm and rehearsed. He studied Crockett's expression. She didn't blink. "I'm reading directly from disclosure forms, Chief Justice," she repeated slowly, as if daring him to dispute the source. He cleared his throat. "Those forms are compiled by the court's administrative office, and I trust the process is handled carefully." "Do you review them yourself?" she asked, tilting her head. "Do you personally ensure what's submitted is transparent and accurate?" A brief pause, long enough to register. "There is a system in place," Roberts said at last. "Each justice is responsible for their own disclosures." Crockett leaned back, her expression firm. She didn't smile. Instead, she let the silence hang before speaking. Interesting. Because where I come from, if you're in charge of checking your own work, that's not accountability. That's convenience. A ripple passed through the gallery. A couple of staffers exchanged quick glances. One let out a half-stifled laugh through their nose. Roberts tried to shift the ground. Respectfully, Congresswoman, the judiciary was designed to function independently from the legislative and executive branches. Our role is to interpret the law, not to bend under political pressure. No one here is asking you to do that. Crockett replied smoothly, "We're not telling you how to rule. We're asking why the same patterns keep surfacing and why they're never checked." Roberts began to respond, but she raised a hand, not to silence him, but to frame her. Next point. "I spent years in Texas courtrooms," she said. "I watched judges lecture young men, black, brown, white, it didn't matter, about responsibility, about how even the appearance of dishonesty could ruin their lives. So forgive me if I don't believe the highest court in the land can't be held to the same standard." Roberts shifted slightly in his seat. "Congresswoman, I do understand your point, but we have always taken concerns seriously and addressed them with internal review and integrity." "You have no binding code," Crockett cut in, "and the only review comes from inside your own walls." She paused. "That's like asking a fox to write the security report for the henhouse." A low murmur rippled through the room. Cameras clicked faster. Reporters leaned forward. She wasn't grandstanding. She was cornering him. Roberts drew in a slow breath, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table. He was still composed, but his tone betrayed a hint of strain. "The court is not above criticism," he said carefully. "But I must remind the Congresswoman that respect between co-equal branches is essential." Crockett glanced down, then back up, the faintest flicker of frustration crossing her face. Not because she was losing, but because she recognized the tactic. He was using the word respect as a shield. "I respect the court," she said firmly. "I respect what it's supposed to stand for. But respect without honesty is nothing more than decoration. And the people who elected me, they didn't send me here to admire your robe. They sent me here to ask why the rules seem to change, depending on who wears the robe." This time, Roberts looked at her longer. The shift was subtle but clear. He wasn't seeing a freshman congresswoman anymore. He was facing someone determined to dismantle every technical shield he tried to hide behind, and she was only getting started. The next papers from Crockett's folder didn't look impressive, just a few thin stapled pages. But they carried weight, the kind that didn't make noise when dropped, but made people fall silent. She slid one page forward and adjusted the mic. "Chief Justice, are you familiar with Dalton versus Mason County, decided in the 5th Circuit 2009? Roberts squinted, not confused but calculating. "Vaguely. That was a procedural ruling on judicial recusal, if I recall." "You don't," Crockett replied flatly. "It involved a judge who failed to step aside, despite indirect financial ties, to one of the law firms. The ruling made it clear. Appearance alone was enough for removal." She tapped the page lightly. "And yet, just last year, Justice Harland sat on Macon Visa Delta Rail, a case where his longtime friend and financial backer stood to gain significantly." Roberts didn't answer right away. Crockett leaned in. No recusal, no explanation, no transparency. And the decision came down, 5-4. This wasn't just a call-out. It was a scalpel cutting straight through the court's defense. Roberts exhaled slowly. "Congresswoman, I'm not here to litigate individual cases." "I'm not asking you to," she said. "I'm asking how a court built on fairness expects the public's trust when its rulings look more like backroom deals than justice." A few quiet gasps rippled through the room. A staffer's pen slipped from the table and hit the floor. Roberts leaned into the mic. "Your language is inflammatory, and your silence," Crockett spoke evenly, "your silence has been even worse." She didn't rush. Each word landed with weight before she moved on. There's a woman in my district, Carla Jennings. Single mother. Worked nights at a hospital for 20 years. Her son was denied financial aid over a clerical mistake that made it look like she owed back taxes. She appealed all the way up to federal court and was told in so many words, "Tough luck." Crockett paused, fixing her eyes on Roberts. But a billionaire with private ties to a sitting justice can get a case heard, argued, and decided in under 4 months, with favorable results. Roberts' eyes narrowed, his hands folding, a little too tightly. He hadn't expected this level of preparation, certainly not from her. The court, he said carefully, operates with limited resources and must make difficult decisions about which cases to take. That does not imply favoritism. But perception matters, doesn't it? She asked. He stayed quiet. Chief Justice, she pressed, does perception matter? He gave a reluctant nod. Of course. Her voice dropped lower. Then I suggest you start caring more about what the people are seeing. Because right now, they don't see justice. They see power protecting itself. For the first time, Roberts had no rebuttal. The room stayed frozen. The chair didn't interject. No one dared break what was starting to feel historic. Crockett turned another page. I came here with respect. But I also came with facts. And the facts say your institution has a problem, a deep one, and it's time someone stopped pretending otherwise. But the real shift came not in her words, but in his response. Roberts leaned forward, clasping his hands as though to steady himself. His tone tried to sound composed, but the rhythm had changed. Less measured, less sure. Congresswoman, he began, while I understand your passion, I would caution against drawing conclusions from isolated incidents without a full understanding of judicial process. Crockett didn't even blink. With all due respect, Chief Justice, Crockett said evenly, I'm not drawing conclusions. I'm drawing connections. There's a difference. The shift was instant. The room's focus wasn't on Roberts anymore. It was on her, and she knew it. In 2013, she continued, lifting a document, you gave a commencement speech at Harvard Law. You told graduates, your credibility is your currency. You said, the moment people stop believing in your integrity, everything else collapses. Roberts leaned back slightly. That's correct. Then tell me, Crockett pressed, her voice sharpening, how does credibility survive when trust in this court is at its lowest in decades? When more Americans believe the court is driven by politics instead of principle? Roberts hesitated. She didn't. You don't get to build a reputation for 20 years and then act surprised when silence around your colleague starts cracking it open. He drew breath to respond, but she cut through. You called this passion. It's not. It's precision. I'm not yelling. I'm not speculating. I'm asking why Americans like Carla Jennings are held to standards your justices ignore in plain sight. Her tone dropped lower, firmer. Do you know what it's like to walk into a courtroom, knowing the scales are tilted before you even speak? I do. I've watched young men cry after sentencing because they knew they never had a chance. Because justice wasn't about truth. It was about who had access, who had ties, who had time. The silence was heavy now. No whispers, no clicks, just her voice cutting through like glass breaking. Roberts tried to steady himself. The court has taken steps. Not enough, she snapped back. Not when billionaires fly justices to private resorts without consequence. Not when rulings that affect millions are written behind doors no one can open. Then came the blow. You're right about one thing. Credibility is currency. And right now, your institution is in overdraft. The line landed like thunder. A clerk in the back scribbled it down so fast, the pen nearly tore the page. For the first time, Roberts didn't reach for a rebuttal. He just sat still. Crockett let the silence linger for 2 long beats before leaning back, letting the weight of her words fill the room. She wasn't grandstanding. She wasn't performing. She was doing what no one else had dared, naming the court's power for what it had become: insulated, selective, untouchable. Robert straightened his tie again, but this time the gesture looked less like composure and more like habit, something to cover unease. Even the committee chair hesitated before moving on, unsure how to follow what had just unfolded. But Crockett wasn't done. Not yet. Not until the American people were pulled into the conversation. This was no longer just a duel with the chief, Justice. She was speaking to the families watching at home, people who didn't know the names of cases but lived with the weight of their outcomes every day. Her cadence shifted, slower, steadier, less courtroom, more living room. "There's a man in Odessa," she began. "Jorge Salgado, truck driver. Worked through the pandemic without a single complaint, never missed a day. But when his brother was detained in a private immigration facility and denied medical care, he filed a petition. The court denied it, without even hearing the facts." She turned toward Roberts. "He asked me why. And I told him because the law was written that way. Because the system hides behind language designed to protect the powerful." Crockett leaned in. "And the highest court in this country had a chance to fix that. But you refused to hear it. No explanation. No statement. Nothing." Roberts stayed silent. "These aren't hypotheticals, Chief Justice," Crockett continued. "These are people who still believe in the law, even when it betrays them. People who think that if they just work hard enough, play by the rules, and someone at the top will care enough to hear them." Crockett turned from Roberts to the whole room. "But what happens when people stop believing that? When they stop thinking justice is possible unless you own a company, fund a campaign, or sit on a board?" Her voice carried a raw honesty. Not anger, not performance, just truth. She let it hang before continuing. "I became a lawyer because I believed the law could be a tool for fairness. I stayed a lawyer because I learned the law is only as fair as the people who wield it. And today, I'm sitting across from someone who holds more power than most of us will ever touch, yet refuses to admit that power can go unchecked." Roberts finally spoke, but his tone had softened. "Congresswoman, I don't dispute that some decisions carry difficult consequences, but the role of the court is not to be a savior. It is to interpret the law as written." Crockett nodded slowly. "And what happens when the law is written to serve a few? When it's interpreted to favor those already at the top?" She didn't wait for an answer. She knew it wouldn't come. "You talk about judicial independence," she said, "but independence without accountability isn't strength. It's isolation." From the back, a quiet voice whispered, "She's right." Not loud, not for drama, just someone saying what many were already thinking. Crockett laid down one last sheet of paper. "This isn't about politics. It's about principle. It's about telling people like Jorge and Carla that their lives aren't invisible, that their stories don't stop mattering once they leave your courtroom." Her eyes swept the room. "Because the truth is, if this court won't hold itself accountable, then the people, through us, must start asking louder, harder questions." The cameras caught Roberts' face in close-up. His mouth was a firm, straight line. No smile, no mask. Silence filled the room. Crockett looked at him once more. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," she said. "I came to remind you that justice isn't about titles. It's not about tradition. It's about people who still believe that somewhere, someone in power actually cares." But she hadn't endured the fire of this hearing just to give a speech. She had one last message, and it was going to stay with everyone who heard it. The silence deepened. Reporters stopped typing. Staffers stopped shuffling papers. Even committee members who had barely looked up earlier now sat frozen, their eyes fixed on her. Something had shifted. Roberts felt it too. His posture remained upright, but the old playbook, calm tone, legal jargon, measured distance, was useless now. Not against her. Crockett closed her folder and rested her hands on the table. Her voice softened. carrying more weight in its quietness than in volume. Growing up in St. Louis, we had this old judge, white man, retired army, tough as brick. But he used to say something I never forgot. A courtroom is only as honest as the people brave enough to challenge it. She glanced at Roberts. I think about that a lot these days. No applause, no theatrics, just gravity. Her words settling into the room like they had been carved in stone. Roberts shifted in his chair, but said nothing. His confidence hadn't shattered. It had simply met someone unwilling to treat it as untouchable. Across the dais, Representative Leonard Franks, a quiet veteran from Arizona, leaned toward his mic and muttered, "Damn." It wasn't debate. It wasn't politics. It was respect. Crockett didn't react. She wasn't there for praise. Finally, Chairman Bledsoe cleared his throat. The committee thanks Representative Crockett for her line of questioning. His voice was slower than usual, almost careful, as if moving too quickly might break, the moment still hanging in the air. Roberts reached for his water glass. Roberts reached for his glass, his hand trembling, just enough for her to notice. Crockett met his eyes. "You don't have to agree with me, Chief Justice," she said softly, "but you heard me, and that's all I came for." There was no malice in her tone, no gloating, just truth, delivered without apology, one by one. The other members resumed their questioning, but the energy in the room had shifted. Their words sounded less scripted, less performative. No one wanted to follow her, but they had to, and no one wanted to look like they were cleaning up after what she'd just done. Even Roberts was different now. His answers were shorter, stripped of theory. His tone clipped, the charm set aside. Not defensive, just aware. Outside the building, the moment was already spreading. Clips of Crockett's exchange flooded social media. People who had never cared about Supreme Court hearings were suddenly watching one, phones glowing in coffee shops and classrooms. A barista paused mid-order to replay her line. In a Dallas classroom, a young black girl asked her teacher, "Is she a lawyer?" And across the country, people who had long stopped trusting the system felt something they hadn't in years. Representation without compromise. Back inside room 2141, Roberts glanced at Crockett once more, just for a second. But this time, there was no superiority, only recognition. Not of defeat, but of clarity. She wasn't up and coming. She wasn't the future. She was now. The room's rhythm returned, at least on the surface. But anyone paying attention knew something had changed. What had begun as another carefully managed hearing was now branded by a moment that couldn't be erased. Jasmine Crockett wasn't speaking anymore, but her presence hadn't faded. Her words still hung heavy in the air. Like a law not yet written, she had done more than confront a Supreme Court justice. She had made the entire machine blink. As the hearing rolled on, and other representatives took their turns, Crockett sat quietly, listening. No smirks, no side comments, just stillness. She knew what had happened. She didn't need to repeat it. About half an hour later, as questioning wound down, Chairman Bledsoe called for a short recess. Members stretched, staffers stood, journalists hurried out to file their stories. Roberts rose too, but before leaving the table, he glanced back. "Congresswoman," he said, his voice lower now, "your district is fortunate to have you." She looked up. "I know." He gave a small nod, less formal, more human, and walked out. He didn't look shaken anymore, just quieter. As the room emptied, a young woman from the gallery approached, a law student from Missouri, her blazer a size too big. She hesitated, then spoke. "I just wanted to say, I didn't think anyone ever spoke to them like that. Not for real." Crockett rose, adjusting her sleeves. "Spoke to them like what?" "Like they're not above you." Crockett smiled. Not wide, not staged, just enough. "They're not." That was it. She gathered her notes and walked out without another word. Later that night, the exchange hit national news. Not just the political shows, but prime time. What captured people wasn't the clash. It was the calm, the precision. Crockett hadn't just won an argument, she'd given a lesson. Commentators tried to frame it. Some called it a challenge to the status quo. Others dismissed it as grandstanding. But those who watched closely, who listened instead of reacting, felt something different. Clarity. For years, people were told the Supreme Court was sacred, untouchable. But Crockett showed, calmly and within the law, that even sacred things must be questioned. Because power without accountability isn't order. It's decay. And maybe, just maybe, a little discomfort in that hearing room was exactly what justice needed. The truth is, real change doesn't always arrive with banners and slogans. Sometimes it walks in quietly, carried by one voice, a voice that refuses to flinch when power tries to silence it. And if Jasmine Crockett could sit across from the Chief Justice of the United States and speak truth without apology, then maybe others could do the same, in their towns, in their workplaces, in their homes. That's the thing about moments like this. They don't just belong to the people in the room, they belong to all of us. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because this is only the beginning.